Welcome to Shift Happens, the podcast where we talk about energy, tech, leadership, and large scale projects, where sometimes, let's be honest, not everything goes according to plan. My name is Manuel.
And my name is Dirk. And together we both talk about topics that we regard as interesting, challenging in the wide world of energy developments.
In today's topic, we're going to discuss if traditional project management is still suitable for projects in an ever-changing world, or if agility should take over completely.
Okay, so let's first describe what traditional project management versus agile project management really means. So when we talk about traditional project management, it's also called waterfall project management, where you have from the beginning a defined scope, schedule, cost, and you can basically develop the project like on railroad tracks along a defined schedule towards the desired outcome. In Agile, in contrast, you have from the beginning the idea of a scope and then a budget for that, and you develop basically the scope further through various iterations until the outcome that you generate is generally accepted by all shareholders involved.
Yeah, the way I understand is that traditional project management or waterfall project management is usually used for large scale projects where the boundary conditions of the projects are quite clear. The process in itself is very structured and it's a very thorough planning before you execute the project. Agile project management, in contrast, is usually used for projects where the scope in the beginning is not 100% clear, or maybe even the boundary conditions of the projects are not 100% clear in the beginning. So you work in smaller iterations, you develop a smaller portion of the projects on the fly, and then you adjust on the go. So agility gives a little bit more flexibility in a sense to adjust to changing circumstances in the project. In context of energy projects, based on my experience, these projects are usually managed in a traditional way because boundary conditions are clear. It's very big projects. You need to do proper planning, as you already mentioned. And you want to make sure that in execution, there is nothing really going wrong in a sense. You have risk management, change management, but with new projects coming in, namely new energy projects such as CCUS projects, hydrogen projects, currently some of the boundary conditions, very important ones, are not very clear. So the question is, does it make sense to use agility to develop these projects further because you wouldn't be able to do it with a traditional approach, maybe?
I see where that is coming from. What I've seen when we started initiating these projects, it took quite a long time in order to deal with all of these floating boundary conditions, specifically, waiting on legislation. How long will it take? What else is there that needs to be resolved? And the technical discussion might also be a bit halted, be held back, because you always are waiting for one information item to become clarified in the end. Yeah. So probably the approach could be that you start working with that flexible mindset towards, and you mature what you can. Yeah. So usually a technical scope can be matured probably in a faster and a more efficient way in these projects, because for any kind of solution you can formulate these things, you can go into feasibilities and start working. It could mean, depending on a lot of flexible boundaries from other areas like legislation, as we said, or commercial questions, that you need to basically develop more than one concept. Yeah? You need to think about 2, 3 concepts at the same time, and then develop these further to be ready for any decision when your commerciality, when your regulatory environment becomes clear.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it makes sense just to name some of the uncertainties in these projects, just to be a little bit more clear what makes these projects currently so special in a sense. So when we think about carbon capture projects, the CCUS projects in Europe, there are quite some unclarities. Namely, CO2 prices are not very clear yet. Legislations in different countries within Europe are not clarified yet. Um, Usually, these projects are not individual projects, but they are projects which are part of a value chain, so to say. So there is actually a lot of different industries that need to work together to make the whole concept work. These industries are emitters that are producing the CO2, transporters transporting it, and in the end, the storage companies that need to store it in the storage. So there's a lot of interfaces, different industries that need to be managed. And there's a lot of unclarities in these individual small projects by the emitter, by the transporter. So there might be some decisions that need to be taken, although the other part is not really ready. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And the question is this manageable in a traditional way, or do you see any advantage in agility there?
Well, as we stated before, um, there's certainly the room to be flexible for a certain time period, but it depends a bit on what kind of project you have in there. Also, this whole chain of projects, there might be one of the projects which is so the weakest, yeah, the one that needs longest. In the projects or in the programs that we have been looking at, it's usually the storage, or it used to be the storage, because they need to first generate a lot of new insights from data before they actually can make a formulation or this thing is now ready, we go to the next step. But that project is then dependent on a transport line. The transport line might be a pipeline or a shipping solution that is dependent on a hub at the coast, maybe when we talk about offshore, and then further transportation back to the linking it back to the emitter onshore. Um, this whole chain is very complex. There is certainly a weak element always somewhere in there. I think the emitter and a hub, these are straightforward technical projects where we say we target that amount of material that we need to take out of the stream, the amount of CO2. The hub will have a certain capacity. Then it comes down to how long does it take to make these transport solutions. And then in the end, the storage side, that the storage side can say, okay, we can inject that amount of CO2, for example. Yeah, but you can also rely on all kinds of complex projects that are going into a kind of an unknown, a regulatory unknown here.
Mm.
Yeah, so there might be projects which are more susceptible, problematic. Other projects can be defined in a more technical, easy way. So it comes down to the whole coordination of the thing, and find these individual solutions where they really need to be applied. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I think about traditional project management, I usually think of something like a stage gate process. So you have a project that is maturing until a certain stage, and at this stage, you usually have a check if the project is mature enough, if it's developed far enough to pass the gate, so you move into the next phase. Now, this works very well if you have a traditional project with known boundary conditions. But what happens, for example, if a commercial agreement at a gate is not ready? So, to my knowledge, usually what is done then is the project is almost stopped at this gate because it's not ready to pass the gate. It has not ticked the box to have the commercial agreement in place. Now, I see the risk that these projects, where there's so much unclarity now, might be stopped in early phases. Although I think that the technical scope, as you just mentioned, can be developed further and be matured further, and maybe the commercial part then needs to be managed a little bit more agile, because you want to be reactive, you want to be ready once you have the commercial agreements in place. You want to be able to you know move forward as fast as possible and not just wait at the gate until this agreement is in place, which might take another year, and you could do a lot of work in parallel. What's your opinion on that?
Well, as we stated beforehand, you can mature various options which will address certain commercial outcomes. Do I need to build this thing small, medium, large size? Yeah. Whatever you build there, and it's dependent mainly also in the end on what is the price of the material, yeah, that you transport. It can be CO2, but it can also be applied to hydrogen projects. What price do you ultimately have to apply on these products in the end? That can lead to a lot of hesitation and stopping basically until this is clarified. Um, so as we said, you can mature parallel certain concepts. You can even drive this further into the feed studies, yeah, in the engineering studies before in FID. You can as well spend that extra money on having uh, two different solutions being looked at, or one solution with slightly different outcomes. Um, you know, Modularization would be also something to look at if you can do modularization on kind certain type of projects. Yeah, you cannot do this on a pipeline, but you can might do it on how many elements you need to switch on in a hub, or how many wells you will in place in a storage solution in the end. So this is all that needs to be looked at. Um, but ultimately, at a certain point, you really need to switch on into a firm plan when things get then really complex and expensive. Uh, Latest point is the FID. And from there on, you need to have a very concise plan what you do.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I would even say you need to start with that then earlier. I think once you go into very detailed engineering, you want to make sure that you have a proper plan in place. You know what you're doing. There's no full uncertainty about the scope and the development concept or whatever there is. I think at a certain point, you need to make sure that this is clear, so you can start the proper planning and then move into execution. Because I think it is still a large scale project. It's large capex. You have heavy investments, heavy industry moving on. And I think people know that when you move into detailed engineering or execution, every change becomes, first of all, very difficult to execute and it becomes very expensive. So you want to make sure that once you cut steel, as people say, that there's not much change happening. And agility is more like, being adaptive, being changeable, so to say. Whereas when you cut steel, when you build a platform or drill wells or build a pipeline, there's not much opportunity to really change it easily without a heavy investment and a heavy effort.
Yeah, but still, in the end, you can always, as you mentioned before, risk management. You can apply a proper risk management with the right mitigations. You can approach a decision point fully aware of remaining risks and uncertainties that you're looking at. That will be then transferred into a kind of amount of money that you need to cater for to cover possible outcomes that you have already covered in your risks and mitigations. Yeah, and that you can even carry on to an FID if it's necessary. Yeah, if you need to bring the whole thing forward, there might be one project in the chain that says, okay, we have a bit of a higher risk picture still, but the whole thing needs to go forward. The whole chain needs to be aware of that. You can talk about mechanisms how to distribute this risk over the whole chain and so on. But this could be also another solution. Yeah, there might be certainly somewhere a point where you really need to go forward. Um, if the legislation environment is developing, but the commerciality is not catching up with the speed. Yeah, there's still a question how many euros you put on a CO2 price, but the framework around already calls for you need to make decisions now. Otherwise, in 5 or 7 years, there will be no project that deals with it. So you might come into these squeezes in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually a very interesting topic, but I think it's a different topic for a different podcast. I would be very excited to talk about this with you as well. But yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I mean, risk management and change management is a very important element for every project, particularly very large scale projects. And as we already said, in these big scale projects, not everything goes according to plan. I mean, you can plan as much as you want. There will be always changes that you cannot plan for and such. And this is what risk management and change management is all about. The only point I'm trying to make here is the better you can plan, the better it is in the execution. There will be always risks that might materialize, but as long as you're on top of them, you can hopefully manage them properly. Nonetheless, the later the change or the risk is appearing, it usually becomes more and more difficult to implement the change and it becomes usually more expensive.
Yeah. So as sort of like an early conclusion already, we talked about in the beginning about agility. Um, Basically, also mainly in a flexible mindset on how you manage projects. Um, in the end, it would be not a fully sort of standard agile project management. Yeah, we would then call it hybrid. You will have elements which are still firmly planned. Others need to be managed in a slightly different way, but everything is then converging towards one point where you reach your sort of standard project management goal and have a really firm plan for the execution, or maybe even earlier for the detailed engineering if it's really necessary. So in that sense, yeah, it makes sense to talk about it, to think about it. Yeah. But it will be coming down very much also to the individual project or group of projects, how that should actually be applied. And it always needs to be tailored in some ways. Yeah. And this is how I would sort of conclude about it in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is now generic concepts. I mean, every project is different. Every project has its individual challenges. Of course, you need to adjust whatever your project is facing and adapt it. I think still that agility can help to progress these projects. Of course, the whole project team, the project manager needs to be aware. If he moves into something like a hybrid project management, there are different challenges coming with it. So you need to manage one part of the project agile. People need to aware about what is agile project management, which is more than just a Kanban board. It's a mentality, how you do the project. And then on the other hand, he's managing parts of it in a traditional way. So this comes with its individual challenges as well. But yeah, to conclude it from my side as well, I fully agree. I think that projects can benefit from thinking about agile project management implementation to a degree in their process. However, they obviously need to adjust it to their individual challenges and problems they are facing. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
With that, we thank you for dialing in today's episode.
I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Maybe it gave you something to think about. Maybe you agree, you disagree. Let us know.
If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues or tag us on social media.
You can find us on MND Consult. That is mnd-consult.com.
And if you have a topic you would like us to unpack or a story you would like to share, feel free to reach out.
So take care and remember,
Shift happens.